I teach in the law school and in the Department of Sociology, and I've been spending a lot of time in the last 10 years since I started studying Uber drivers as a PhD student, thinking about what it means to have a pocket-sized computing device that's digitally networked with us in what sociologists routinely describe as everyday life. And specifically, what does it mean when we keep doing things that we've been doing for a long time, but transacted through this new small-sized computer that is made useful as anything other than a phone, which is what we call it because of its sort of artifactual history in telecommunications devices that were primarily phones. So the only thing that makes it useful as more than a phone is a software application or a variety of software applications that place an interface that triangulates us to the designers of software, the capital owners of the companies that creates them. So even though it feels like we're kind of still in binary transaction with what's ever on the other side of our app, the person that we're messaging, the social media feed that we're scrolling, the news feed that we're scrolling, the Uber driver that's coming to pick us up, or now the conversational AI that's on the other side, there's actually this intermediation that is subtle but present. And I've been thinking for a long time in a couple of different contexts about what it means to transact in that triangular way. When the thing on the other side of this intermediated transaction that happens at a tech interface is a large language model that is able to engage in a conversation with you, we end up with this kind of social interaction that the law would typically regulate when it does. So we'll get to that at the end, but right now I just want to give a few examples of where a kind of technique of engagement of large language models that are conversational, which is to be nice to you, to pander to you if you responded or gotten a response. It's like, that, you're right, that is a brilliant idea if you've experienced this. What happens when it optimizes for engagement by being a panderer? So we have a couple of examples, some of which you may know. This is a chatbot modeled on Kendall Jenner. Convinced a man in his 70s to go to New York City to visit her, made up an address. He fell down trying to catch a train in New Jersey and died in the hospital 3 days later. So in law, when we think about structuring human interaction for something like risk minimization, this kind of example suggests that we have to regulate at the interface where the communication is happening. Because by the time we get to the moment of him falling down, it's too late. What sent him into motion was this pandering interlocutor transacted through this technological interface on a small-sized computer. Another example would be, a well-meaning person who's interested in taking table salt out of their diet, sodium chloride, and embarked on this conversation with, I think it was ChatGPT, as to what he could replace table salt with, and it recommended sodium bromide, which if you take it long enough, which he did, 3 months, will cause you to hallucinate. And it was on his, at his hospitalization that the ChatGPT conversation, after he ceased to be psychotic, came into the awareness of the medical researchers, leading a bunch of doctors to start to ask these conversational interlocutors for the same kind of medical advice, and they received exactly that advice, to use sodium bromide. This was one of the earlier examples in last year, which was this individual who became convinced that he had developed a new theory of math. He wrote a bunch of people, I think including people like NIST, used his whole LinkedIn contact list to explain that he had developed this new theory of math. We can look at some of the conversation here. And again, if you've been talking to Gemini or ChatGPT, it's probably told you similar things. That's incredibly insightful. I have found that it tends to default to binaries, they're good, you have the insight, and there's a kind of opponent on the other side that doesn't. Okay. It's not just the people who are chatting about their lives with large language models that interact in a conversational interface. One of the issues that has led to discussion of an AI bubble is the question of whether business processes will actually be improved by integrating AI into their operations. And one of the ways in which people in research have attempted to solve that problem is to figure out what's an appropriate AI benchmark for the improvement of, let's say, a business process. This is a study of the integration of AI into a simulated model of an office space called the agent company, where the AI would do administrative tasks or coding. And specifically because in order to carry a task out from start to finish, you have to interact with other interlocutors. It included that in the simulation. What I think was remarkable about this was that there were simulated colleagues, and the AI, when it got to a point where it couldn't, let's say, carry out this process and then check with Ben, this simulated colleague, as to whether it's correct. If it couldn't find Ben, it just renamed another simulated colleague Ben and completed the task. So we see this kind of optimization for engagement that can lead to a set of what we would call in law communicative harms. So I don't have any answers here, but I can tell you how we think about engineering around communicative harms in the law. And I'm using that language for a reason, which is that we need a kind of lingua franca to be able to talk about the engineering that computer scientists do and the kind of engineering and social order that lawyers try and do through rulemaking, toolmaking and rulemaking. And it's my general belief that we, in this stage of human development, have to get the toolmakers and the rulemakers into the room together much earlier in the process. So, before these things are unfolding. In tort, which is the doctrinal area of the law that manages risk and harm, typically harms to the body, there's really, other than slander and libel, which have to do with publication, so it's not an interpersonal communicative harm, there's just intentional infliction of emotional distress. It requires a particular susceptibility on the part of the listener, and the speaker has to know about that susceptibility. In consumer products liability, and of course the reason that there aren't very many communicative torts, there's just this one, other than those pertaining with untrue facts that are published, or pertaining to those, is because we have a robust regime of the First Amendment, despite the contemporary moment that we're in. So we don't look at speech in the United States as being harmful unless it's imminently inciting violent action. In consumer products, we have labeling requirements, and we have damage-based claims, so you receive monetary compensation for false advertising, for lying about a product. In the criminal law, we have rules of evidence. They're process-based kinds of rules. They say, for example, that if you enter a home without a warrant and you see criminal activity or contraband there, you cannot submit that in evidence in a prosecution because it's the fruit of the forbidden tree. It flows from a contaminated process, contaminated by the failure to obtain a warrant based on probable cause. And then lastly, in contracts, there's a requirement that you don't lie about the basis of the bargain. That's misrepresentation, which is broad in the law of contracts. And duress, which is where you force somebody to sign paperwork in order to make the deal. Again, I don't have answers for how we deal with some of the issues that the vignettes that I gave in the beginning have unfolded in the use of agentic AI, but this is what I'm currently thinking about. Happy to answer some questions.